The Great Hong Kong Sex Novel by George Adams. Copyright George Adams, 1993. The following appears on the back cover. When hitmen can be recruited from over the border for a few $1,000s and a full English breakfast, you'd better be careful how you treat their local women. Writing for his psychiatrist, whom he hates, Nigel Trelford, successful young barrister, recounts his past life as a Hong Kong playboy. Chauvinist and racist by his own admission, he is exploited as much as he exploits, and in the end submits to a fairly honourable defeat. Blowing away the cobwebs and clichés from contemporary English fiction about Hong Kong, the novel is an hilarious and shocking exposé both of the expatriate lifestyle and the psyche of Hong Kong women. There is a dedication for Tony Giles. There is also a motto. He might sink into that degradation of life with which the word colony was once associated, a whiskey-soaked colonial debauched by the wiles of Oriental women. Austin Coates, The Road. The novel begins with a letter. Psychiatric inpatients, St. Clair's Hospital, Hong Kong. Nigel Piers Trelford. Dear Lawrence, the patient, 38, British, single, barrister by profession, has lived in Hong Kong for 7 years. He was referred to me by the men's psychiatric ward of King Edward Hospital. The patient was found by uniformed police officers wandering amongst the traffic of Pedder Street Central at lunchtime in an emotional and delirious state. He maintains he was being pursued by a gang of triads at the behest of a vicious Chinese woman. Investigation showed that there was some basis of truth to his story, but the woman in question has not been located. When referred to me, the patient was intermittently anxious and depressed, apparently suffering from an acute nervous collapse. He was treated with benzodiazepines and bianserin. Physiological examination showed nothing significant. Somatic symptoms include lassitude, fever, loss of appetite, aching joints, etc. The patient now accepts the conclusion of colleagues and myself that his condition is largely supratentorial in nature. This is despite his profound hostility to the medical profession, psychiatrists in particular. The patient is an attractive and virile man, highly successful in his profession. Inferiority complexes of any kind are absent. The neurotic conflict, if there is one, is probably sexual in origin. Mr. Trelford displays what feminists would describe as a chauvinist attitude to women, regarding them as objects for his own pleasure. On the other hand, he sees himself as a victim of Hong Kong and other Asian women, a judgment which has some foundation in truth. I suggested the patient should write his recollection of important events leading up to his collapse, and he produced the attached journal in weekly sections. He likes to write it. I do advise you, however, to read it with great caution. Let me know how you get on with Mr. Trelford. I think you will need a lot of luck and a lot of patience. You'll also need to have all your wits about you. Regards to Vera, Ronald. The Great Hong Kong Sex Novel. Chapter 1. Night in a Girls' School. Yes, I'm one of those dreadful expatriate types with the inordinate desire for East Asian women, and somewhere along the line I'll tell you all about it. Now, John Latteguy wrote a novel called in English Yellow Fever, a title I always thought perfectly descriptive of my condition, but it really isn't about you-know-what. It's a collection of reminiscences of Vietnam and the good old days. I remember finding a copy in a shop in Hennessy Road and skimming through it for something, well, salacious, something for a boring hour of the afternoon, but to no avail. Perhaps it all got lost in the translation. There are so many things to tell you apart from actually, plunging or whatever you think sex is all about. I've heard sex described as adoration. Some people see it as a messy necessity between waking and rising, a la Tristram Shandy. Others think it is like breathing, only noteworthy when things go wrong. A particularly serious homosexual, the type who dresses up in a sort of army uniform to go on gay lib marches, told me it was the most important thing in life. I'll let you be the judge of that. No, there are so many things around the subject, particularly if you are as unlucky as I, blessed with a beautiful fiancée but still falling in love at every street corner, on every staircase, in every restaurant and subway train. There are all sorts of ways to torture yourself, and love is perhaps the sweetest. It's certainly better than tormenting yourself with guilt, social ambition, or the pursuit of money. Which brings me to Hong Kong, where I have been, am, and shall be, God and the Joint Declaration willing, to the end of time. What can we say? So much has been said in the coffee table books, the guides, the historical sketches, the boring monographs by Hong Kong University's leading lights. We all know it's glamorous. James Clavell and a host of hack writers have told us so. We all know it is corrupt and on the brink. We do not need the written word to tell us that. We can use our eyes and ears. And Susie Wong. Everyone knows about Susie Wong. Well, someone told me when I arrived with my 2 enormous trunks of law books to take up a position at Scott, McFarker and Chan that people in Hong Kong don't have time for sex. It interferes with the money making. A Filipina told me that. She was the first to grin at me and give me that gaze which you can only describe as penetrating. I knew the moment I saw her what she had in mind. Filipinas let you know. This is not always the case with women. Anyhow, I digress. I'll come to Filipinas presently. All in good time. There is so much to tell. I did not come with sex on my mind. Far from it. I never had any urge for Asian women before I arrived. Not in the least. I always thought of them as, well, not quite what we should expect to call a woman if we came to describe the sex. There really was something missing to my mind. There's nothing so subjective as love, so please allow me my opinion. I think it was largely the face. I still believe that it's difficult to find an Oriental face which does not repel me slightly some of the time. I can't say that of European women, at least most European women. I've always been able to see my betrothed, a stunning Englishwoman. Yes, there are such creatures. At any time of the week, any time the week sends us. At breakfast on Sunday afternoon, getting out of a taxi in the rain, heaving on top of me in the heat of passion. I've always been able to regard her with delight, if not, as you will see, with desire. So, how did it happen? It happened like a lot of things, by degrees. When women find out they're lesbian, they don't wake up one morning and think, dykes are in, let's go out and get one. You don't decide to become a lecher overnight, not even if you have the sharpness of mind barristers normally possess. The myth put around by feminists and local xenophobes that the red-faced barbarian men get off at Kai Tak with lust in their groins is simply not true. For many, it's just another foreign posting, and their minds are full of thoughts of mortgages, property prices, school fees, that sort of thing. They have usually brought a wife with them, salvaged from Latin America, India, Europe, or, God help them, the USA. And there are a great many men who don't respond to the, well, exotic environment of East Asia. They are happily married and stay that way. As I said, sex is very subjective, and some people just don't prize it. Good luck to them. No, it begins as a sort of bewilderment, I would say. You see, candidly speaking, the real problem is that in Britain or the USA, pretty women Young women are so thin on the ground that you sort of become used to seeing something special only once or twice a day. And then so many Western women, no, this is not a cliché, are so into defeminization these days and the complementary emasculation when they get involved with a chap, that you have to have a pretty good imagination to get excited by just looking at them. If you want to see what I mean, go and look at some of the women that get onto the Lama ferry some evenings. Not that the women in Asia are necessarily prettier, they just show what they have a lot more. They know how to dress, and there are so many young women after all. I've always said, and this has got me into a lot of trouble, that Hong Kong has some of the ugliest women in the world, as well as some of the most beautiful. You just don't see the ugly ones. Of course, some brutes in bars say that all the women in Hong Kong are ugly, but I don't think they mean it. It's a kind of rationalization. Often they just can't get any. So there I was, Nigel Trelford, smart, well-heeled, a darling girlfriend, moving into my apartment above the shopping mall in Admiralty, wondering which clubs to join, where to work out, where to drink. Hong Kong looked just fine. And then they started to waft into my life. You may leave the house with the best of intentions, sated even, perhaps intensely worried, at any rate with your mind 1,000 miles away from sex. But then, in the street, there is always one who strikes you unawares, out of the blue, in a debilitating attack of lust. And you cast your eyes elsewhere, you sublimate, you look for other distractions. You are pleased to note that her face does not match her beautiful body, so that you can feel safe for a little while longer, but you are never safe for long in Hong Kong. You are a man alone in a girls' school for one night, many nights, and the ugly prefects are all sound asleep. I suppose that the first girl who became, in this sense, an obsession, was my secretary, Dorothy. Yes, that's another sort of cliché, but I will come to my less likely assignations later. I thought she was rather ordinary when we first met, but as her clothes became briefer and less functional, my perception of her changed radically. She was always there for me, gave me a depth of support I had not known with other secretaries, or with other women, come to mention it. The first cases assigned to me, to break me in, so to speak, were the tedious remnants of the last occupant of my office, a New Zealander who had decided to head off home before Hong Kong killed him, or caught up with him, it was rumoured. The office, I should mention, was a spacious one by Hong Kong standards, with a reasonable view of the harbour, if you didn't mind craning your neck past a building or two. It was also reasonably quiet. I came to value that more than anything else. Dorothy was introduced to me, smiling slightly, engagingly, and to me, disconcertingly. She was dressed, if I recall correctly, quite sensibly, not showing much leg and not plunging in her blouse. As she did not have much to plunge into, this was probably just as well. Her manner, as she went through the files, giving me as much help as she could provide from her memory of events with the New Zealander, a dreadful lawyer, by the way, her manner was quite correct, showing perhaps too much deference, too much submission. Perhaps that is what hooked me first, before I had time to take in the features of her face. They didn't mean much to me then, and her figure, quite tall, very slim and well proportioned. Then there was her voice. It was set somewhere at the beginning of the high range of treble, with a slight breathless, girly charm in it, not as extreme as Japanese girls, but along the same lines. That was what got me most. Auditory seduction. I don't know if Casanova wrote anything about voices, but they are, to my mind, a true indicator of what is inside the person, really inside, as opposed to what the person wants to show. You see, I'm not as superficial as you may think. I did not pore over Dorothy, imagine her with no clothes, or imagine the way she sipped her coffee or sucked on her pencil. That may surprise you. Of course, in the end, I came to imagine all kinds of events with Dorothy, events involving her in a number of locations, costumes, poses, and moods. That all came later, as I say. It is quite usual to take one's secretary out to lunch, especially in Hong Kong, where eating has reached the status of religious observance. I don't know why exactly the local people are so transfixed by ingestion. Ideally for me, eating would take about 20 minutes a day, and it has in the past for long periods. I soon realized that I would have to mend my ways. One can be a crazy guilo as long as one wants in Hong Kong, but not if one wants to find one's way to the hearts and the beds of the locals. Die Liebe definitely does go durch den Magen, as the Germans say. Dorothy, unfortunately, was a muncher and a slurper. She evidently hadn't read that little book I was to find in all the MTR bookshops about Western etiquette and table manners. To be fair, though, she knew quite a lot about Western things, much more than I did about local mores, but the open-mouthed chomping was more than a little off-putting at first. "Do you like Hong Kong, Mr. Trelford?" She put down the big soup spoon by the side of her plate and looked at me pleasantly, ritualistically, not expecting the non-small talk reply, which I suppose verged on rudeness. Sometimes, when I'm in a good mood. I don't know why I said that, as so often Dorothy said nothing after I'd said something unusual. I mean, sometimes I like it, when it's not too hot and not too noisy or crowded. Yes, Hong Kong is crowded. But that isn't a real problem for the foreigners. I don't see how they can feel crowded. They're so different from the crowd. And anyway, some people feel crowded if they don't have 100 acres around them. It's all in the mind. Dorothy looked at me in an interested way. I didn't quite know what to make of it. Was it admiration, the boss and his secretary? Of course, a lot of that had come my way in my previous office life in England and Germany. Running through my mind, however, at that time was what I saw going up the staircase, slightly behind Dorothy as she raced for the lift. Her legs. Of course, I'd noticed them crossing and uncrossing in the office a number of times and delicately averted my eyes. But such propriety was now cast aside in favour of that irritating feeling of lust which begins to invade everything, so that you begin to say the most ludicrous things just to avoid saying what is uppermost or undermost in the mind. Yes, you are right, Mr. Trelford. Don't say I'm right if you don't agree with me, Dorothy, and call me Nigel, at least outside the office. When Dorothy's large brown eyes wrinkled at the corners and her mouth spread into a smile that lunchtime, I guess my goose was cooked. The itching was now less an intellectual idea than something manifestly physical working on the nether regions. Dorothy, we've been working together now for several months, and still I feel I don't know anything about you. Do you live alone? Yes, in Sha Tin. And you have no plans to get married? No, I don't have a boyfriend. He died last year, in Italy. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's all right. Actually, I didn't like him that much. He always wanted me to be with him. He always telephoned and said, I want to come round. He even came to the office. He always wanted to know where I was. I was very unhappy when he died, but now no more. And you don't see other boys now? No, they always ask. They want to come round to see my flat. They want me to help them with their legal problems, but I say no. I don't think I really like Chinese men. They're so small. So I started dating her. I suggested she show me something of Chinese culture, some meals, some museums, some movies. I've noticed that mixed couples, usually a Western man and a local woman, are often seen at the cinema. The delicate courting of thigh against thigh and the wandering hand. Is it wandering for the packet of sweeties or to something more intimate? That is the thrill of the widescreen for me, at any rate. I would time things so that Sam, my fiancé, never noticed. Most of it took place between 5 and 7, that time which is lost in most people's lives for some reason, when they're either committing working late, shopping, commuting. They are the magic hours of illicit romance. A rule that was to stay with me was the hand grip rule. The first time you reach for a girl's hand, what is her response? Does she hang on to you limply, or does she grip you firmly? Or does she avoid you altogether? I think that's probably the make or break transaction, and everything that follows is just the unfolding of that moment. Dorothy and I left the office one evening just as dusk began to descend on the pencil towers of Central, and the streets were becoming awash with pretty women. I remember Baudelaire used to devote a lot of writing time to dusk. I'm sure he would have loved sundown in Hong Kong, the nightclub hostesses scurrying to work, the office girls emerging from captivity, the expatriate lechers stalking Pedder Street. Anyhow, I think it was in the lift up to the restaurant that evening when my hand brushed more than it should have done, against the sensible, slightly worn office suit of Dorothy, against the support pantyhose, and finally against her soft, slightly lanolined hand. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling, the spark of lust. The corners of my knuckles gripped the folds of the skin around her middle finger joint, and her hand cupped mine. There was no recognition on her face save for a slight wincing under my gaze. We were crowded to the back of the lift, and our hands were invisible. This saved Dorothy from blushing, for many Hong Kong girls do not like to express love in public, sometimes not even by a smile. Chinese girls, as I was to be told over and over, do not do such things. With the door of romance so clearly ajar, what followed in the restaurant did of course verge on public obscenity, if that is, anyone had observed what was going on under the table. Above the thick linen tablecloth, Dory sat primly, even expressionless, her long hair shimmering in the halogen lights suspended above her. Below the table, my knees gripped her right leg while her right hand reached as far as physically possible up my thigh. I think you can guess the pleasant physical sensations engendered thereby. What happened next was bound to happen, of course. Dorothy was attacked by guilt. She withdrew her hand from my receptive thigh, gently prized my knees apart, crossed her legs, and ordered an ice cream. I don't think there was anything deliberately coquettish about the maneuver. On the contrary, there seemed to be real feeling behind it. What I actually said to girls on such occasions escapes me now. I suppose I gushed as usual about my past life, my travels, told them stories about how difficult it was to find the right girl, how European women had never really interested me, how Chinese girls were so pretty, and all the other verbal armoury of the apprentice seducer I then was. Some girls were unbelievably gullible, others nodded along as if the seduction were expected of one, but was not believed for all that. Putting one's cards on the table, as I have done on occasion, is vastly gauche for a number of reasons, not least of which is that it makes the poor girl lose face. She may know that you are a playboy, but she must not be confronted with the fact. Deviousness is expected of one. Of course, it may be that the deviousness was only in my mind. I still do not quite know whether Chinese people are naturally complex and contorted in their thinking. They do appear to be so, making difficulty in relationships where there need not be any. On the other hand, I may have got it all wrong. Perhaps they are just too straightforward for Westerners to take. A week after the restaurant interlude, I invited myself to Sha Tin, that German-style new town behind Lion Rock, on the pretext of an urgent consultation with a client. Dorothy picked me up and led me to a pleasant Canto-European-style flat on the 15th floor of a new block whose only disadvantages seemed to be an appalling uniformity and an oppressively low ceiling. Her furniture was like the set of one of the local TV soap operas, but slightly less dazzling. It was all there: the battery of remote controllers for the entertainment machines, the showroom stickers still adhering to the corner of the TV screen, and the display of the karaoke mixer, the generously cut leather sofa, the lacquered display cabinet full of trinkets, the protective plastic clinging to the lampshade, and the high-backed pseudo-Italian dining room chairs. "You want to play?" she asked, pressing one of the myriad buttons on one of the consoles to initiate a game of electronic tombola. "Not quite yet," I replied. The remains of a takeaway curry pizza lay on the dining table. The air conditioners had reached the point of rheumatic inducement, and the last rays of that day's sun were sparkling on the deserted communal swimming pool I could glimpse through the narrow chinks of Dorothy's grey plastic Venetian blinds. All in all, it was an unlikely setting for romance, but lust ignores incidentals. I edged my way along the sofa, wrinkling the leather uncomfortably below me in my impetuosity. It emitted a low-pitched imitation fart. "Dorothy," I began, and placed my left hand on her fiercely clamped knees. The knees opened slightly, and I pursued their invitation. I will not bore you with the bedroom details. Suffice to say that Dorothy enjoyed the proceedings enormously, almost as if she had done little else since a very early age. Once again, as we sat in our underwear on the sofa afterwards, wet towels strewn on the sealed parquet floor below us, I became keenly aware of the disparity between Dorothy's general demeanour and her actual behaviour. My own behaviour was merely deceptive. Dorothy's always verged on hypocrisy. "Did you enjoy it?" I asked, reaching for my glass of now flat Carlsberg. "I don't want to talk about those things," she replied, and meant it. Our perambulation of the shopping mall afterwards was similarly memorable. Local people always react to seeing a mixed couple. If the girl is attractive, they may display hostility. If she is ugly, she is acceptable. Luckily, Dorothy was not quite stunning enough to call forth the most vehement of emotions, yet the undercurrent of aggression towards us was nevertheless palpable. Groups of schoolgirls, sporting their first clumsy application of lipstick, would cease their helpless collective mirth as we walked by, their faces taking on a not unattractive pout of protest. Shopkeepers would look up from their tills and silently analyze the possible reasons for the unfortunate predicament this evidently respectable Chinese girl had placed herself in. Housewives eyed me, then Dorothy, with a look of soulful jealousy and outrage. Dorothy, I felt, was enjoying the notoriety. When we sat down in the restaurant, I, wincing at first in the fluorescence and cacophony, she insisted on ordering in English and explaining to the waitress that I was quite skillful with chopsticks and did not need a knife and fork. Thank you very much. She also saw to it that we were given the regular rather than the toned-down foreigners' menu. Already I was being protected as well as being claimed. Suddenly I felt less of a stranger, less on the sidelines. I always lost my foreignness with a local girl. "You're very pretty now," I said, as we attacked the array of gleaming dishes before us. "Not for a Chinese girl." "No, I think you're prettier than most Chinese girls. At least you don't have a figure like an ironing board." "Yes, some people say I have a nice figure. Some people think I'm half and half, not Chinese at all." "But you are Chinese." "Of course." "Is your family from the north? You're a bit taller than most Cantonese." "No, they're from Guangdong. I'm a local Chinese girl." "And do local Chinese girls usually go with engaged foreigners?" "I don't want to talk about those things." And we didn't talk about those things. Riding home by marathon taxi through the Lion Rock Tunnel, I confronted guilt and deceit like details from a solicitor's brief. Interesting and disturbing in some respects, but ultimately abstract and distant. All lawyers have the capacity for that sort of doublethink. The Nazis had it in Nuremberg. They produced their recollections of the war years like dusty and irrelevant records of someone else's actions. It was what you call a sort of situational morality. But I didn't think about such things at the time. All I could think of was how well I felt and how life could be good at certain moments. But there was something running through my mind, underneath, that is, not quite in focus. I remembered a joke made by a client I got off a charge of embezzlement some years ago. It stayed in my memory and I often recalled it at sticky moments. Question: how can you tell when a lawyer is lying? Answer: his lips are moving. The joke still hung in my mind as I kissed Sam in bed briefly before turning on my side and surrendering to somnolence.